So the other day we were at Magic Kingdom and I said this. These two attractions, Tom Sawyer Island as well as the riverboat over on the Rivers of America, I think that they were both great. I think that they were built for a very specific moment in time, a very specific audience, but times change and things need to be updated and things need to change with the times. And here at Walt Disney World, I mean, I'm not going to make any friends with this, but this is not a museum. This is a theme park. And while there are certain things that stick around for a long time and they hold up over the years, these two attractions, they weren't on that list. And you could see this with the number of people that visited these attractions. You could see this with the way that they were sent off. It was far from what we saw for other attractions that had their final run, like Splash Mountain or Muppet Vision 3D. And I think that that says a lot. And today I wanted to expand on this a little bit. So that's what we're gonna do while I sit here in this somewhat quiet, somewhat shady spot, rehydrating before I make my way back to the car. And yes, we're still wearing the bluey shirt that we were wearing the other day because it's the same day. Yeah, sometimes I do multiple of these in the same day because something comes to mind and I want to sit down and chat with you. So here we are. Anyway, so there are a lot of interesting things about the Disney community or Disney fandom, if you will, whatever it is that you want to call it. Some of which are really ironic, especially Disney being what Disney fans claim it is. And look, I'm not going to get into a long list of these things today, but there are two that I want to point out because they're relevant to like Tom Sawyer Island, the Liberty Bell, Rivers of America, and honestly some other attractions here at the Walt Disney World Resort closing. Also, just as a brief disclaimer, yes, I know that this probably applies to Disneyland as well, but as I often say, my wheelhouse is Walt Disney World, so that's what we're talking about. But if you have thoughts on this related to Disneyland, you know the drill. Pop them in the comments. Okay, so the first thing is that when it comes to Disney fans, when it comes to the Disney community, especially when it comes to attractions and these beloved attractions like the Liberty Bell, like Tom Sawyer Island, like Muppet Vision 3D, it's always too little too late. You know, people's memories are rather short, so I don't expect anyone to remember the way things were prior to Disney announcing that these attractions were going to close, but they never made the top of anyone's must-do list. And they were notably skippable until Disney said they're going away. They're going away for good. And then everyone came out of the woodwork. All of a sudden, these attractions were iconic. And it was a tragedy that they were going to be taken away from us. How could they have the audacity to remove this thing that none of us took the time to ride in the first place? Muppets. Case in point. But you know, zeroing back in on Tom Sawyer Island and Rivers of America, there was a lot of hullabaloo when Disney announced that they were going to be closing these attractions. People went so far as to say that this was the end of Disney. Like, this is the thing, the nail in the coffin for the Walt Disney World Resort. Walt is rolling in his grave because these attractions, this corner of the park was going to be removed and replaced with something else. And I get it. I understand why people feel this way. People are very passionate about these areas of the park. They've been here for a really long time. But, you know, when it actually counted, these attractions definitely weren't as popular as the comment sections would make them out to be. There was a lot of talk and not a whole heck of a lot of walk, which was evident by the send-off of these two attractions. It was pretty lackluster, and that makes sense, because these two attractions, they were hanging on well past when they should have been. And those of us who have been paying attention, we knew this, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, Tom Sawyer Island, not very popular. Playgrounds in general are only so popular here at the Walt Disney World Resort. But also, attractions like the Liberty Bell, they don't have the same draw that they did back when Walt Disney World first opened. And most of us, again, who are paying attention and aren't wearing those Mickey-shaped rose-colored glasses, we've been seeing this. And while it might not be easy to accept that these things just aren't as popular as they once were, facts are facts, you know? And, you know, as a side note, because I am going to move on from this, I do think that it's interesting the tone that Disney fans or the Disney community, or at least certain corners of the Disney fandom / community takes, is a similar tone that they take with other things that could arguably be described as classic. Things like the Tomorrowland Speedway. People will sit here and talk about how terrible it is for this long list of reasons, but they're also the same people who I would argue, if they got rid of Tomorrowland Speedway, would be like, I can't believe they got rid of that. It's such an icon. That's the same type of thing that's happened for some of these other attractions for a long time. It's just really convenient when something is on the chopping block to forget about all of that and focus in on the things that aren't necessarily consistent with reality, but are more consistent with the nostalgia, the feelings that make y'all warm and fuzzy. And that speaks volumes, in my opinion. But so does this other thing that I wanted to mention, and that is that, Walt's vision only really matters to some corners of the Disney fandom when it applies in the way that the Disney fandom wants it to apply in a very specific moment in time. Walt Disney had this thing for innovation, doing new and interesting things. He mentioned that Disneyland, and I believe he also said Epcot, would always be in a state of becoming. It would evolve, it would change, it would improve over time. And, it's interesting, or odd is probably a better word choice, that for some corners of the Disney fandom, the Disney community, it's always about Walt would be rolling in his grave, and this is what Walt wanted, until we think about the fact that Walt was a creative who was innovative, who was always about doing something new and interesting and different and changing things up. He was about progress, right? Like, why are we glossing over this when it comes to tearing something down to build something new, removing something that no longer moves the park forward, which, by the way, is something that Walt himself did many times throughout his career. And it's weird, again, as someone who's been paying attention to hear people so up in arms about what Walt would have wanted, but the suggestion that maybe Walt would have wanted updates is going to cause him to roll in his grave, which, by the way, I always think is such an interesting concept, like as though any of us have any idea what Walt Disney would have wanted. The man was a creative. He was probably obsessed and probably insufferable, as most creatives are. He wanted to do things that were impossible. It's another one of his famous quotes. Isn't it fun to do the impossible? People who are agreeable, they don't try to do the impossible, and they also don't play it safe, which is what it would be to never change anything. I mean, again, I'm not one of those people who's like, Walt would want this, but I would think that if Walt wanted anything, it would be progress. Again, these words, they're ingrained in Walt Disney World. Why are we ignoring it when it's convenient to our story? As a side note, if you want to get a better sense of the type of creative and risk taker that Walt was, do some looking into what Epcot was. The Epcot that Walt wanted, not the Walt Disney World Resort, this watered down theme park thing that we got. It's interesting, I'll tell you that. But anyway, all this to say, I do think that, this could probably be a whole nother discussion, but these two things they create a problem for not only the Disney fandom, but also Disney. Because, look, I know that Disney, the current company that is the Walt Disney Company, have made some questionable decisions. I'm not going to sit there and backpedal on that. But I think that part of why they make some of the decisions that they do is because the Disney fandom does these two things repeatedly. They talk and talk and talk about what they want, but at the end of the day, that's not actually what they want. They're not communicating effectively. They want these attractions around, but they never want to ride them. They want Disney to be more like Disney, but don't change anything. Don't take any risks. And while there's, again, no denying that Disney has its faults and have made some really terrible decisions over the years, focusing too much on the bottom line, in my opinion, there's no denying that in some ways they are following the lead of the Disney community, of the Disney fandom, that tell them they want something, but actually they don't know if they mean it. Here's a couple quick examples that I'll leave you with, okay? And again, I don't expect you guys to remember any of this because memories are short. But in 2019, people hated Magical Express. What a waste of time. You have to wake up early. It takes you so long to get where you're going. Why not just get a rideshare? Disney heard you and got rid of Magical Express. In fact, their press release even said that that's exactly why they discontinued the service. Because you guys said you preferred rideshares. It got you where you were going faster, gave you more control. Individual Lightning Lane selections where you could basically pay to ride an attraction during a designated time. That's something the Disney fandom asked for as well. Right around the time that Rise the Resistance opened up. Yeah, I know you don't remember it, but it's true. See, at the time, you had to go into the park to get the virtual queue. People were waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get into the park for 6. It was nuts. I was here. And people hated it. Because you might not be able to ride at all. And then you don't know when you'd be able to ride. So wouldn't it be great if you could just pay for your time slot? Done. Disney heard you and they gave it to you. And these are hardly the only examples that we could point to. We could be talking about this all day. Anyway, I just think it's something to think about, especially as we move forward. You know, if you like something, don't take it for granted, because when you do, and when you're loud about it, as so many in the Disney community and Disney fandom are, Disney hears you and they give you what you want. Anyway, I'm sure that a lot of you are going to disagree with me, and you're probably going to have a lot of strong things to say, and I encourage you to say that. Just keep it respectful, and, just take these things into consideration. Next time you're at the Walt Disney World Resort, or next time you're super loud about how much you absolutely hate this thing. Do you really? Do you really? Anyway, I'll catch you guys later. Bye.